The final farewell for Hollywood's brightest legends didn't always happen in a peaceful cemetery under a polished headstone. While the world mourned their passing with flowers and fanfare, few knew that some of the most iconic stars of the silver screen found themselves in resting places as bizarre and dramatic as the roles they once played. These aren't just graves, they're shocking plot twists in lives already filled with fame, mystery, and tragedy. Imagine this. One of America's most beloved comedians was hidden in a secret grave for decades after his corpse was stolen in a ransom scheme. Or a stunning screen siren whose ashes were scattered over a quiet Swedish fjord, only for locals to build an unauthorized shrine that now draws fans from every corner of the world. In this episode, we're peeling back the curtain on the strangest and most haunting final chapters of Hollywood royalty. These are stories far stranger than any script they ever brought to life. Charlie Chaplin. The final scene no one expected. The world knew him as the Little Tramp, a silent film legend who made millions laugh without saying a word. But what happened to Charlie Chaplin after death could have been ripped straight from a Hollywood thriller. After peacefully passing away on Christmas Day, 1977, in Switzerland, Chaplin was buried in the tranquil Gauss cemetery near his home. It should have been his final curtain call. But just 3 months later, his grave became the center of a crime so bizarre, it stunned the globe. On March 2, 1978, cemetery workers arrived to find something chilling. Chaplin's grave had been dug up. His heavy oak coffin was gone, vanished without a trace. There were no signs of chaos or damage. It was clean, precise, professional. Then the calls began. Chaplin's widow, Una, received chilling phone threats demanding $600,000, around $2.5 million today, for the return of her husband's body. The kidnappers even sent photos proving they had it. But Una didn't cave to fear. She worked closely with Swiss police, who tapped phone lines and monitored hundreds of public booths across the region. Weeks dragged by with no break as the family endured an emotional nightmare. Then came the breakthrough. Investigators traced the calls to two struggling Polish immigrants, Roman Wardas and Gancho Ganov. Their motive? Not just greed. Wardas later claimed he believed the Chaplin family was so wealthy they wouldn't miss the money. But the court didn't share his logic. Wardas was sentenced to 4 years of hard labor. Ganov got 18 months, suspended. And most importantly, Chaplin's body was recovered, buried in a cornfield just 10 miles away. On May 17, 1978, Charlie Chaplin was reburied in his original grave, but this time, encased in reinforced concrete to keep him safe forever. Today, visitors to that quiet Swiss cemetery see only a modest headstone. What they don't see is the incredible story buried beneath, the tale of a legend whose final act became one of the strangest, most surreal crimes in Hollywood history. Marlene Dietrich, the woman with two graves. Marlene Dietrich, smoldering icon of old Hollywood, fierce anti-fascist, and the original symbol of glamorous rebellion, lived a life defined by contradictions. And in death, those contradictions only deepened. Her final resting place tells a haunting story of identity, rejection, and the impossible question, where does someone who belongs nowhere truly rest? When Dietrich passed away in Paris in 1992, the world mourned. But her death ignited a fierce debate. Where should she be buried? Though she had proudly become an American citizen in 1939 and courageously supported the Allies during World War II, going so far as to denounce her native Germany under Hitler, her connection to the country of her birth remained complicated. Despite Marlene's lifelong vow never to set foot in Germany again, her daughter claimed she had expressed a dying wish to be buried in Berlin and honored it. On May 16, 1992, her body was quietly flown to Berlin for a low-key funeral attended by dignitaries, celebrities, and a conflicted public. But it's not just where she was buried that makes her story so strange, it's how. Instead of resting in a grand, star-studded cemetery befitting a legend of her magnitude, Dietrich was laid to rest in the unassuming Städtischer Friedhof 3 in Schöneberg, a modest corner of Berlin. The reason? Family tradition, yes, but also fear. Her outspoken anti-Nazi past made her a target, and officials worried a more prominent site might attract hate and vandalism. Yet her spirit never really left Paris. There, outside her former home on Avenue Montaigne, an unofficial shrine quietly grew. Admirers began leaving flowers, letters, and candles, transforming a simple building facade into a second grave, a spiritual resting place in the city she truly loved. And then there's her legacy: iconic gowns, reels of film, treasured photographs, all gifted to Berlin's Film Museum. But with a condition. In her will, Marlene demanded these treasures could only be displayed after German reunification, a powerful gesture that underscored her fractured relationship with her homeland. Her gravestone, tucked in Berlin soil, bears only her name, birth and death dates, and one quiet German inscription: Hier stehe ich in den Marken meiner Tage. Here I stand by the marker of my days. So simple, so poetic, and yet behind that simplicity lies one of the most complex, divided legacies in modern cultural history. Marlene Dietrich wasn't just buried between two cities, she lived between two worlds. One foot in exile, the other in legacy. Never fully accepted, never fully claimed. And maybe, in that eternal in-between, she finally found her truth. John Barrymore, the borrowed grave. John Barrymore, the legendary actor once hailed as the Great Profile, didn't just leave behind a legacy of unforgettable stage and screen performances, he left behind one of the most bizarre afterlife tales in Hollywood history. A tale so strange, so macabre, and yet so undeniably Barrymore that it sounds more like a dark comedy than real life. In May of 1942, Barrymore's hard-living lifestyle finally caught up to him. He died of cirrhosis and other complications, closing the curtain on a life filled with brilliance, scandal, and excess. His body was carefully prepared for a respectful funeral at the Pierce Brothers Mortuary in Los Angeles, with plans to be laid to rest alongside his family at Philadelphia's Calvary Cemetery. But then Hollywood happened. According to legend, and in Hollywood, legends sometimes ring truer than facts, Barrymore's closest drinking buddies, including Errol Flynn, W.C. Fields, and director Raoul Walsh, hatched a plan for one last night of mischief with their fallen friend. Walsh allegedly bribed morgue attendants to borrow Barrymore's body for a few hours. They whisked him away to Flynn's home, where they propped his lifeless body in a chair during a poker game, raised glasses in his honor, and even snapped photos. It was a final toast, a surreal celebration of a man who had lived every moment on the edge. While some dismissed the tale as pure Hollywood myth, too many witnesses, including Raoul Walsh himself, have insisted it happened. Even Flynn, in his autobiography, hints at the prank, though with fewer gory details. Whether true or embellished, the story has become part of Barrymore's legacy, one last performance no one could forget. But the strangeness didn't end there. Though he was originally buried as planned in the Calvary Cemetery family plot, his son, John Drew Barrymore, later had his remains moved in 1980 to Philadelphia's Mount Vernon Cemetery. He believed the new site, complete with a grander monument, better reflected his father's towering presence in Hollywood history. Yet rumors swirled for decades that Barrymore's body wasn't in either grave. Some whispered that after the prank, he was cremated and the coffin buried empty. Those rumors were finally laid to rest when records confirmed he had indeed been buried intact. Today, visitors to his final resting place find a solemn, elegant monument. There's no mention of poker games, no nod to stolen corpses or drunken escapades, only a simple inscription: "Good night, sweet prince." A quote from Hamlet that seems almost too perfect, considering the strange, theatrical odyssey Barrymore's body took before finding peace. His life was a performance, his death a legend, and his grave? Borrowed, but unforgettable. Bela Lugosi, the man who took Dracula to the grave. Bela Lugosi didn't just play Dracula, he became him. And when death came calling in August 1956, it didn't find him alone. It found him wrapped in the very cape that had made him a legend. In one of the most haunting and poetic burials in Hollywood history, Lugosi was laid to rest in his original Dracula costume, forever bound to the role that defined and ultimately devoured his career. Though Lugosi had once basked in the spotlight after his unforgettable performance in Dracula, 1931, his final years were marked by heartbreak, career decline, addiction, and near poverty. He'd spent decades frustrated by typecasting, desperate to break free from the shadow of the Count. Yet when it came time to say goodbye, his family made a bold decision. He would go into the afterlife as Dracula. Not because he asked to, he didn't, but because they believed, deep down, he would have wanted it that way. Some say the cape used was a replica, but Lugosi's son and biographers insist it was the real deal, a priceless piece of Hollywood history buried 6 feet under. That choice alone has sparked endless fascination. Who else has literally taken their most iconic costume to the grave? But the eerie beauty of Lugosi's farewell didn't end with the cape. His funeral was far from a star-studded Hollywood send-off. The industry that once celebrated him barely noticed his passing. Few celebrities showed. Yet outside the chapel, a stunning sight unfolded. Hundreds of fans arrived wearing vampire capes, a sea of Draculas paying tribute to the one true king. It was bizarre. It was beautiful. It was unforgettable. Lugosi was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, a humble Catholic resting place that stands in ironic contrast to the unholy image he portrayed. For years, his grave was marked only by a simple plaque, until devoted fans raised funds in the 1970s to give him a monument worthy of his legacy. Today, visitors still come. They kneel beside a black granite stone etched with his name, Beloved Father, Bela Lugosi, 1882 to 1956. They come not just to honor the man, but to remember the monster he so perfectly became. Beneath that soil lies more than just an actor. There lies a legend, draped in a cape, forever caught between the curse of immortality and the silence of the grave. Jane Mansfield, the heart that wouldn't die. Jane Mansfield, the blonde bombshell with a life full of sparkle and scandal, met a horrifying end in a 1967 car crash at just 34. But even in death, she refused to fade quietly. Her final resting place is one of Hollywood's most unforgettable memorials, a large, pink, heart-shaped gravestone that mirrors the over-the-top, love-drenched image she crafted in life. Mansfield's death sparked a media circus, swirling with rumors and sensational headlines. Contrary to the enduring urban legend, she was not decapitated in the crash, though her injuries were devastating. After the autopsy, her body was laid to rest in Fairview Cemetery in Penn Argyle, Pennsylvania, her childhood hometown, far from the bright lights of Los Angeles. But her grave? It's anything but ordinary. Shaped like a heart and tinged with soft pink, the monument bears her birth name, Vera Jane Palmer, and the haunting inscription, "We live to love you more each day." It's a shrine that perfectly captures her legacy, not just as a sex symbol, but as a woman adored beyond her image. Over the years, whispers of the strange and supernatural began to swirl around her grave. Visitors claimed to smell her signature perfume, even in the dead of winter. Some reported ghostly whispers. Others swore they saw fleeting glimpses of a blonde figure moving between the stones. Paranormal investigators took notice, making her resting place a regular stop on haunted Hollywood tours. Meanwhile, back in Hollywood, Mansfield has no official memorial. But at the Louisiana roadside where she died, fans created their own tribute. Flowers, lipstick-kissed notes, and photographs turned the crash site into an unofficial shrine, so much so that local officials eventually installed a marker to honor her. Then came the conspiracy theories. Some fans became convinced she was secretly buried in Hollywood, and that the pink heart in Pennsylvania was just symbolic. Her family and funeral staff have repeatedly debunked the rumors, but they persist, feeding into the mythos of Mansfield's larger-than-life persona. What makes it all the more surreal is the contrast. The woman who turned seduction into stardom is buried in a quiet, conservative small-town cemetery. Her blushing pink heartstone rises in striking contrast to the plain gray slabs surrounding it, just as Jane Mansfield always stood out in a world of ordinary. Today, her grave has become a sacred stop for lovers of vintage glamour. Fans still leave lipstick marks, pink feathers, and heart-shaped trinkets. The love hasn't faded. In fact, it's grown. Her monument has even been recreated as collectible miniatures, proof that while Mansfield's life was cut short, her legend is forever. Steve McQueen, the Ocean View Farewell. They called him the King of Cool, a rebel on screen, and even more so in life. But Steve McQueen's final goodbye wasn't just different, it was extraordinary. When he passed away from mesothelioma complications in November 1980, Hollywood expected a traditional farewell, a star-studded grave at Forest Lawn or another elite cemetery. But McQueen wasn't interested in becoming a tourist attraction. He didn't want marble, mausoleums, or monuments. What he wanted was freedom, even in death. The day after his passing, McQueen was cremated, and what followed was a farewell as bold and unconventional as the man himself. His ashes weren't scattered by the shore or from a luxury yacht. No, Steve McQueen's final flight took place in a vintage World War II Stearman biplane, piloted by none other than his old friend and flight instructor, Sammy Mason. Together, they had once danced through the skies. Now, Mason took his friend's remains high above the Pacific, off the coast of Santa Paula, California. As the plane banked over the ocean, the ashes were released into the wind, carried away into the same wide-open sky McQueen had always loved, finally merging with the sea. There was no grave, no marker, no public monument. McQueen had made it clear, no shrines, no crowds, just the earth, the air, and the freedom he lived for. Yet fans refused to forget. Over the years, they created an unofficial memorial at the hangar where he kept his beloved vintage planes, leaving behind photos, model cars, letters, and mementos as quiet tributes. Then in 2012, long after his ashes had vanished into the elements, a small, modest monument was quietly installed near that same airfield. It didn't hold his remains, just a simple inscription. Steve McQueen, 1930 to 1980. The spirit lives on. His legacy didn't end with the credits. In fact, McQueen's unconventional farewell sparked a quiet revolution. Other free spirits in Hollywood, like Paul Newman, chose similar paths, scattering their ashes in places that mattered to them, not to the industry. Some fans today still make that same skyward journey, flying from Santa Paula, tracing the route McQueen's ashes once took. No flowers, no headstone, just silence, wind, and sky. And maybe that's the most fitting tribute of all, for a man who never wanted to be caged even by death. Jean Harlow, the star behind the sealed door. Jean Harlow, Hollywood's original blonde bombshell, died tragically young at just 26, but it wasn't just her sudden death that stunned the world. It was what came next that cemented her legend in both beauty and mystery. After Harlow succumbed to kidney failure in June 1937, her mother, Jean Bello, better known as Mama Jean, took extraordinary steps to preserve her daughter's memory, not just in Hollywood history, but in stone and steel. Instead of a traditional burial, Mama Jean purchased an opulent private sanctuary inside the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn in Glendale, California. But this wasn't just a tomb, it was a fortress of grief. Harlow's body was placed inside a triple-sealed, solid bronze casket, a custom piece that cost $5,000 at the time, nearly $95,000 today. That casket was then sealed inside a heavy marble sarcophagus, locking her forever behind 3 impenetrable layers. The most haunting part? The room itself was, and still is, sealed. No family, no friends, no fans were ever allowed inside after the initial entombment. Mama Jean left one chilling exception. A caretaker was permitted to enter only to replace fresh flowers, which she had arranged via a trust fund to be delivered in perpetuity. For decades, the room was silently refreshed with floral beauty, though no living soul could witness it. And yet, even in death, Harlow's identity was obscured. The inscription on the marble crypt does not read Jean Harlow, the name adored by millions, but instead bears her birth name, Harleen Carpenter, along with the words "Our Baby." Not a single mention of her cinematic triumphs, her stardom, or the electric screen presence that captivated a generation. In one final act of control, Mama Jean separated the myth from the woman. The mystery only deepened after Mama Jean's own death in 1958. Though she was initially entombed beside her daughter, Harlow's stepfather later had her remains moved, leaving Jean alone, sealed away from the world she once dazzled. Today, visitors to Forest Lawn can only view the exterior wall of the private chamber. The room itself remains locked, untouched and shrouded in silence. Rumors swirl, whispers that Harlow was buried in a pale blue satin gown, clutching a note from her beloved William Powell. But with the room sealed forever, no one can say for sure. Jean Harlow's final resting place isn't just a grave. It's a symbol of Hollywood's obsession with beauty, mystery, and the desire to control every last frame of a star's legacy. Decades later, her crypt still holds more questions than answers. And perhaps, that's exactly how she would have wanted it. Rudolph Valentino, the lover who never found his final home. Rudolph Valentino, the silent screen's most iconic heartthrob, found eternal rest not in a grand mausoleum, but in a borrowed tomb, launching one of Hollywood's strangest and most haunting mysteries. His sudden death from peritonitis in August 1926 at just 31 years old sent shockwaves across the nation. Over 100,000 devastated fans flooded the streets of New York, rioting outside the funeral home, desperate for one last glimpse of the man who defined romance on screen. But Valentino's afterlife turned out to be as dramatic as his films. When his body was brought to Hollywood, there was no money left in his estate for a proper tomb. His fortune, mishandled and squandered, had vanished. So his close friend, screenwriter June Mathis, the very woman who had discovered him, stepped in. She offered a space in her family crypt at Hollywood Memorial Park Cemetery, now Hollywood Forever, as a temporary solution. But fate had other plans. Just 1 year later, June Mathis died unexpectedly. Her family needed the crypt back. In a strange twist, Valentino's casket was quietly moved to the neighboring space, just one crypt away from where he was originally laid to rest. And so, Hollywood's most romantic leading man ended up spending eternity in what amounts to borrowed space. But the oddities didn't end there. Beginning on the first anniversary of his death in 1927, a mysterious woman, dressed head to toe in black, began appearing at Valentino's crypt. She would silently leave a single red rose, then disappear. Every year, she returned. For decades, dubbed the Lady in Black, her identity became part of Hollywood folklore. Eventually, it was revealed that multiple women had taken on the role, some chasing publicity, others driven by genuine devotion. Meanwhile, plans for a fitting tribute never came to life. Valentino's former manager formed the Valentino Memorial Guild, collecting donations from fans to build a grand mausoleum. But the monument never materialized. The money? Misused and mismanaged. And so, the star who once lit up screens around the world remained in his humble, unintended crypt. Yet every August 23rd, the day of his death, hundreds gather for a memorial service at Hollywood Forever, an annual tradition that has continued uninterrupted since 1927. It's the longest-running event of its kind in Hollywood history. Though his resting place is marked by a simple bronze plaque reading, Rudolph Valentino 1895 to 1926, the stories surrounding it are anything but simple. From ghostly cold spots and the scent of cologne lingering in the air to claims of seeing his spirit wander the grounds, Valentino's final resting place has become a hotbed for supernatural legends. And so, the great lover of the silent era remains one of Hollywood's most haunting enigmas, not just for how he lived, but for the borrowed tomb where he still waits for the monument he was promised, but never received. Jimmy Durante, the love he never left behind. Jimmy Durante, the raspy-voiced comedian with the unmistakable nose and even more unmistakable heart, ended every performance with a line that puzzled millions, "Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are." It sounded like a farewell to a mystery woman, until his death revealed it was, in fact, the most heartbreaking love note ever whispered across time. When Durante passed away in January 1980 at the age of 86, he left behind more than a legendary career that spanned vaudeville, radio, film, and television. He left behind one of Hollywood's most quietly powerful love stories. His grave, tucked away at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, tells it better than any stage ever could. Long before his death, Jimmy had purchased a burial plot, not for himself, but for his beloved first wife, Jean, who died suddenly of heart failure in 1943. Shattered by her loss, he bought the plot next to hers, vowing that one day they would rest side by side. And despite the decades that passed, And even a second marriage to Margie Little that lasted 20 years, he never wavered in that promise. When the time came, Jimmy made a tender but bittersweet decision. He chose to be buried next to Jean, not Margie. A gesture that spoke volumes about the depth of his first love. His gravestone, simple and unadorned, bears no tribute to his fame. Just his name, the words, "the one and only," and a quiet final resting place beside the woman he never stopped mourning. And what of Mrs. Calabash? For years, Durante never explained who she was. But after his passing, friends revealed that it was his private nickname for Jean, a play on the town Calabasas, where the two once shared an unforgettable day. Every night he said it on stage, he was saying goodnight to her. Hollywood being Hollywood, even his trademark nose sparked rumors after his death. Durante had once joked that his famous Schnatzola should be buried separately. It wasn't true, of course, but for years the cemetery received questions about the so-called nose plot. Today, visitors to his grave find no fanfare. Just a modest stone with his and Jean's names, a quiet tribute not to the icon, but to the man behind the laughter. In the end, Jimmy Durante chose not the spotlight, but the love that never dimmed. A comic genius whose final act was a love story for the ages. Mae West, the star who never returned to her stage. Mae West, Hollywood's original femme fatale who once purred, "Why don't you come up and see me sometime?" made a final choice in death that left even her closest friends puzzled. For a woman who lived boldly, loved loudly, and bent every rule in her path, her final resting place became one of Tinseltown's most curious contradictions. She passed away in November 1980 at the age of 87, after a career that shattered taboos around female sexuality, independence, and power. And yet, the woman who never backed down from the spotlight was laid to rest in a way that felt strangely silent, traditional, distant, and oddly detached. What makes her burial so mystifying is that decades before her death, in the 1930s, West had quietly purchased a series of crypts at the Cypress Hills Abbey Mausoleum in Brooklyn. By that time, she had already left New York behind for good, choosing the flash and fame of Hollywood over her hometown. She never once visited the mausoleum, not even when she returned to New York for shows. It was as if she chose her eternal spotlight without ever stepping on the stage. And when she finally made her last journey, some 2,800 miles from Los Angeles back to Brooklyn, her final send-off was the opposite of everything she'd been known for. No diamonds, no grand parade, a closed casket funeral with barely any fanfare. The woman who lived like a showstopper had scripted a curtain call in complete silence. Friends called it her final contradiction. Then there's the plaque, just a simple bronze marker. No quotes. No nods to her trailblazing career. No, "Come up and see me sometime." Just Mae West, 1893 to 1980. Understated to the point of erasure. But the mystery didn't stop there. Her iconic gowns, scripts, and memorabilia, items that told the story of a woman who revolutionized showbiz, weren't displayed or auctioned like so many other stars. Instead, they were locked away in storage, untouched, collecting dust. It was as if the legend had been packed up and hidden, her legacy buried along with her. Today, if you visit Cypress Hills, you might walk right past Mae West's crypt without even realizing it. No sparkle, no flash, no sign of the woman who once made the world blush. For a star who lived so unapologetically out loud, Mae West's quiet, distant farewell remains one of Hollywood's most surreal mysteries. A final act written in whispers rather than roars. These extraordinary burial stories reveal something far deeper than eccentric final wishes. They uncover the lasting tension between fame and privacy, illusion and reality. For many of Hollywood's most iconic stars, their final resting places reflect the very contradictions that define their lives. Carefully curated public personas unraveled at the grave, where the desire for privacy clashed with the world's hunger for access. Studios pushed for grand, tourist-filled memorials, while the stars themselves longed for quiet, personal goodbyes. Families sought to preserve dignity and intimacy, even as fans demanded open doors to say farewell. What's most haunting is how these stories refuse to end. Even decades later, their graves remain active stages for new chapters. Charlie Chaplin's stolen coffin, the mysterious woman in black who still haunts Valentino's crypt, Marilyn Monroe's borrowed bench visited daily, they remind us that these sites aren't just graves. They're living monuments, evolving symbols of public obsession and collective memory. And perhaps that's the ultimate twist. Our fascination with these stars doesn't fade with their deaths. If anything, it grows. Their burial sites have become pilgrimage grounds, where visitors don't just mourn, they connect, reflect, and rediscover. These physical spaces stand in stark contrast to today's instant access culture. Unlike streaming a film or scrolling through an Instagram tribute, finding Jean Harlow's sealed crypt or Steve McQueen's secluded memorial takes effort. That effort creates intimacy. It turns admiration into something tangible. These journeys tell us something profound about stardom, that the spotlight rarely turns off. In life, these actors played grand characters while fighting to protect their real selves. In death, the roles continue. Their bodies may lie in obscure or modest places, but their presence, through stories, screen legends, and eternal fan devotion, continues to grow. And so, we reach the final act in this tale of Hollywood's strangest burials, plot twists even the stars themselves couldn't script. From Chaplin's bizarre body theft to Mae West's untouched mausoleum, we find new windows into the lives behind the legend. What's most striking? These stories don't diminish the myth, they humanize it. They remind us that behind every glittering performance was a real person with a real ending, no matter how dramatic, quiet, or strange that final chapter may be. If you enjoyed this journey into the forgotten corners of classic Hollywood, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories from behind the velvet curtain. Tell us, did any of these resting places surprise you? Have you visited one yourself? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and until next time, when we return to the silver screen's golden ghosts, remember, some stars never truly fade. They just rest where the world still watches.